Alright, welcome back to the Warhorse podcast, pilot episode 3. Tonight I've got some notes and a few places I want to get to. Kind of a mixed bag. I'm going to start off by reading you guys a list of some potential guest ideas. Some of them are pretty much locked up, easier to lock up than some of these others, and in no particular order. We have James Lafond, who I think is, I'd say, an 8 out of 10 certainty. I've interacted with James before. I've read some of his books, and he did a couple of posts in review for King of Dogs that were favorable. And if you don't know, if you're not familiar with James, very singular character. I believe he's from Baltimore. At least that's where, most of his writing is based. I guess he's native to that place. And he travels around. I think he's got kind of a seasonal circuit, but he is right in the thick of it. Not terribly chock full of resources, and I think that's partly, this is my reading into it, I think that's part of the way that he stays pure. But a fascinating guy, and widely respected in certain circles for sure, and I think it's well deserved. His nonfiction stuff is scorching, maybe not necessarily sentence to sentence, but the way that he's thinking about the world and history in particular is, he's got some hot takes, we'll say that. And his fighting acumen is, in his particular niche, it seems to me, not being a world-class machete fighter myself, it seems to me to be kind of unmatched. And so you have this dual-sided character who on the one hand is very contemplative and thoughtful, and then you have, and that bleeds into the other side, but there's a very strong familiarity with the brutal side of things. Anyway, we'll go into that more. Sam Finlay, who you guys might know, I've interacted with a little bit online. He's got a great book called Breakfast with the Dirt Cult. He was a soldier and very sharp, and maybe we could talk writing as well. As I'd be curious to know how his life has what turns it's taken since he put that book out. Independently published, I believe, but again, very sharp guy with a foot in both camps, if you will. Michael Hoffman. I mentioned Michael Hoffman, and and I am currently, not right this second, but I'm in the multi-stage process of digging through my storage unit to find my copy of Secret Societies and Psychological Operations, which I have read maybe 5-8 times, I don't know. And I found my copy of Twilight Language, so I'll go over that. Mr. Hoffman, I believe, was a reporter for either the Associated Press or Reuters, something like this. And I know very little. I think the internet knows very little about, his early years. I know he located himself long ago in the panhandle of Idaho, and he may or may not make a living from his writing. I'm not sure. I know he has a lot of kids, and he's a very devout Christian. I'm not sure what denomination he is, but he takes it seriously, which I can respect. And in terms of those two books, I've said it before, and I hope to say it again, that for me anyway, the first one, Secret Societies and Psychological Operations, or Psychological Warfare, I can never remember, was like a pivotal book, because, and I'm going to go into a little bit more depth here, because I think that if you guys are interested in it, a full review, explication, exegesis from my point of view might be instructive, because he's essentially espousing a conspiratorial worldview, but a highly developed one with a highly developed historical basis, very well thought through, and I wouldn't do it justice right now, but similar, to Twin Peaks, in several. I mean, I've already made this connection, but another connection is I watched, that first episode of Twin Peaks. I believe I was a freshman in high school, and I watched it. I might have been a sophomore, I don't recall. I think I skipped parts of the second season like most people did, because it started to sort of veer off into, I don't think David Lynch was at the helm. But I do recall the moment there where Laura Palmer basically tells the audience, and I think Dale Cooper, I'll see you in 25 years. And then I guess it's a credit to everybody involved, even Showtime, which is probably not a great friend to humanity. You take my meaning. However, I think it's ultimately, it's a testament to David Lynch, who is one of the few creative geniuses, legitimate, who also got a shot in the mainstream, say in the past, 20-30 years. And the fact that he tied that together, and he actually showed up again with season 3 25 years later, is still, it just adds to the gravitas of the whole project, to say nothing of his commitment, how much importance it must have played in all of the actors and writers and the other players' lives, those first couple seasons, and then those 2 movies. How much they admire David Lynch. How could you not? There's a few things that that I would disagree on with David Lynch, of course, and you too. But anyway, he's another guy who, might be very much worthwhile to spend some time with, like a full episode or a half episode. But anyway, similarly, Michael Hoffman, that first book came out in, I guess, 2001, and I think it preceded The Fall of the Towers. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it did. And 20 years later, he shows up with kind of this, it doesn't have the tone at all of like I told you so. However, he did tell us so. And to me, this sort of points to a recurring theme, a longevity, a commitment, consistency. Like I said with Lynch or suggested, there's probably political stuff or whatever that I wouldn't want to go into with him. Probably same with Hoffman. I know he's got some odd takes on Orthodoxy and Catholicism, but he's got some takes that are pretty irrefutable, so it gets into the weeds, similar with the politics. I plan on doing some type of caveat in hopefully the first official episode I'll probably have to write it out, but hopefully it will summarize my point of view on the ideology, which, real quick, I don't think that most of us are. I think that, as I've said previously already, we're so sapped of energy, so full of Dunning-Kruger, and the suite of related kind of dysfunction that, I'm probably wrong. I'm certainly wrong. Friends and family that I disagree with, I know they're wrong, but they're probably right about some stuff too. And somehow, I'm not making it my goal to be a peacekeeper necessarily, but much has been said from various voices that, well, we just need to talk in this country, or we just need to get divorced in this country. Well, I'm not getting divorced from anything, and I am of the opinion that I think I keep hitting the mic. I'll try to stop doing that. But I'm of the opinion that the course is charted, and it was never really up for debate. This is absolutely a dialectic, and of course we fall one side or another a little bit. And I've got some notes here to talk about, some Portland and some yoga stuff, which maybe I'll go back into this. But anyway, way off track here. Michael Hoffman is, the point there was, I think a very important sort of figure, totally underappreciated, maligned, shit-canned by everybody, in New York or wherever publishing, LA. They wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole, yet this guy can think and write, and the level of depth that into which he is able to peer is almost without comparison in present day. So I'll reach out to him and see. He seems to be, a little reclusive, which is understandable. The next guy, Paul Sharp, we talked about him. I think he's amenable. I've not discussed it with him yet. We've already kind of gone into his background a little bit. Quintus Curtis is a guy that I happened upon through Twitter, and I'm not certain, that he would be interested However, I think he's got some stuff that I would like to know more about. Some takes on death, which is, we've touched on that. I've got a post that I'm working on related to what I call death work, breath work, and death work. But Curtis comes from a very scholarly background. I believe he's a lawyer. He went to MIT, and I think he's somehow sort of dually operating in both maybe Brazil and Kansas. But which reminds me, I had a request to bring the Warhorse diesel back in, so it's back in, and it feels good. I'll have to work on that for you. Okay, so Quintus Curtis, he's a translator. I believe he speaks, or at least writes, a couple of ancient languages. As well, he seems to be a guy with a pretty strong head on his shoulders and a pretty strong sense of direction and fairness and ethics. So he may or may not. I've interacted with him again online. Next, Ed Calderon. This guy has got to be accessed because, as alluded to in King of Dogs, one way that I imagine the future of America shaping up is just much like Mexico. I don't know if that came across in the book. It was sort of a poetic moment, not necessarily something I wanted to beat the reader over the head with. However, there's so many differences to this country that, and never mind the fact that Mexico itself and the cartels already have a substantial, some might say enormous, influence on events here. I don't think it's quite enormous, but if you're familiar with the work of Catherine Austin Fitts, who was a former head of HUD, or an assistant deputy, some high office in the federal government, and then she was like an investment broker, and I think she went back to that in a more kind of philanthropic or charitable manner. She, back in the days, some of you might recall a dude named Michael Rupert. That's where I heard of Catherine Austin Fitts. And even then, and then still now, she's doing this fantastic work on showing how money flows. Like, if you imagine the giant currents underneath the ocean, that seems to be how money sort of works. There's, drops and trickles that we have access to, and then there are these massive currents that are actually moving the course of history. So, one of the, ways that money moves is the laundering of drug money and the maybe not the total control, but enough control to direct all of that cash, whether it was in Colombia in the 80s or Mexico of late. You're talking about like $500 billion to $1 trillion a year. If you think that that's just gonna, well, I guess we're just gonna let that slide. No, I don't think so. And that's kind of her expertise. Ed's manifesto on Instagram, I think, he's been tentative to approach anything like that, which is fine. I would not necessarily want to go into that, and I'm not entirely current on his latest output. What I kind of latched onto with him, though, was his DIY, for lack of a better term, or maybe it's just a Mexican approach to things. And we mentioned, I think we mentioned this in the first episode, the criminal of purpose, and this relates, of course, to the phenomena of Bronze Age pervert, and sort of the future that he sees for those of us who might find ourselves oppressed in one way or another. And I think Ed is pretty hip to some stuff that, I mean, I think it's entirely understandable that guy's very careful about what he admits to or puts out there, and man, I don't know. I don't think I could handle that type of constant pressure. But I think that, maybe I'm reading in too much as well, but he's a fantastic wealth of knowledge, super creative, super capable, 10 years of fighting what to me seems like probably the most serious, quote, war, even though I don't know if it was ever officially labeled a war. I mean, if he's going through doors when, tomahawks, chopping people's heads off, and seeing, thousands of mass graves, or thousands of bodies in at a time in mass graves, and come through, I know there again, I mean, you think there's some PTSD and some central nervous stuff that he might want to share or go into. I think so. I think too he's special in the sense that he, similar to Paul Sharp, he's not one-dimensional at all. The guy might be a marketing genius as well. I was there at the beginning when he was just working with Tad Gear and a couple others, and pretty meteoric rise, well deserved on all counts, based strictly on his experience and his expertise, but also moving through the social outlets. The guy redefined what was possible. I suppose Magpul came before and what was that? Noveski. They added some, I guess I would say, similar to what I'm advocating. We're going to talk about this in a little bit with yoga and breath work. These guys as well just yanked back some of the imagery, some of the flexibility, the artistry, if you will, from the hands of the culturally dominant left, and just said, fuck that. I don't even think, at Ed anyway, maybe his unique point of view, being right there on the border, speaking really good English, but identifying as a Mexican, maybe he just saw right through that. One of the big issues I observe on a daily basis is this hesitancy, or it's the mold again. It's, this is my lane, these are the things that I'm good at, that other stuff is for them, however, whatever pejorative label comes after the comma in that sentence there, etc. And I don't think that's a winning strategy. I think that's stupid, and I think the when we do get to Hoffman, or I can get a chance to go deeper, the egregore, the sort of demonic aggregation of sin embodied in a tribe, clan of people. This is in the Old Testament as well, a similar sort of phenomena. we gotta stop that. And it's just waiting. It's just sitting there on the table. Nobody's even guarding it. If you look at this, I'm sure you guys, I didn't look at it beyond the little clips that were posted to Instagram, but this douche guy, Colbert, and his dance number, it's sad, it's pathetic. They weren't all that funny, actually. I grew up in an era where you had guys like Eddie Murphy, Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, Cheech and Chong. The list goes on, and it seems to me to just be giant step down, giants, to the point where somebody like Stephen Colbert is actually a force to be reckoned with on the cultural landscape. That's hard to take. Anyway, so Ed Calderon. And then lastly, all but locked up, I have a good friend from childhood who spent a lot of years on the street in, I think, up and down the West Coast. And, I don't want to make it real personal. I will say highly intelligent guy. Like anything you want to throw at him, from math to art, both sides of the brain, and a giant heart as well. Just a great athlete, not such a great student because he was just bored out of his mind, like most of us were. I got to work on my ums too, so we're gonna address that. So I appreciate you sticking with me on those. There we go again. Alex is his name, and I'll talk with him about how much information he wants to give out. He has, similar to Ed, a whole treasure trove of tips and tricks, tactics, because the guy is alive. He made it out, and he paid for it dearly. So some of that knowledge, I believe, deserves to be imparted. We'll go more into him when it comes. Another friend, also very high intelligence, an excellent student, an excellent athlete. I've known him for like 20 years, I think, and a long haul trucker. 20 years. I think he's pushing 2 million miles over the road. One of the most well-read people that I know. Very well-rounded in terms of his intellectual achievements. You imagine 20 years on the road with audiobooks, and then spending most of his free time reading and watching movies and similar. This is a guy who I think has a very unique point of view right now. Truckers tend to see things before the rest of us. He's on the backside of the functional part of civil society, and that could be really interesting. And last on the list, somebody who's very, very close to me, and I would say is, if not a master, sort of herbalist, right on the cusp, and also a very experienced, doomsteader, homestead, farmstead lifestyle, orthodox, homeschooler, the whole package. And there was some feedback in the comments and in email that this might be an angle to take, and her unique contribution is that, back to the the cultural divide, she's not divided. Similar to myself, she's sought to not be stuffed into those boxes and not consider it off limits, even though maybe her politics or religion or what have you deviate. And I say this, you know, guys may not understand, but the naturopathic, the holistic, Weston A. Price, all of it seemed to me when back in Portland in like the 90s that this stuff was apolitical. It was just a question of how deeply had you looked into the medical apparatus. Fast becoming appropriate to describe this as the medical control arm of the technocracy. This was obvious to many, many people back before Portland became the hellhole that it is now. And it was more about like rebellion. It was more, I had more of a flavor of that classical liberal who stood for, you know, essentially the Constitution. Certainly freedom of speech. What do we have now? This is the point. We don't know what we have now. These are not, you know, liberalism may very well in a philosophical sense lead to this outcome. That's not going to be argued tonight. We're talking about the same human beings in a lot of cases, and maybe most of the cases that have run up against a wall of cognitive dissonance, or they're just fading so hard that these observations such as you know, my body, my choice, but only for my body. I think this is a common thing, observation going around right now. That's I've talked to you know, Biden supporters and the like, and that's actually an observation that's just, yeah, well, fuck it this time. So anyway, that's kind of the end of the list. If you guys have other suggestions, I would very much appreciate it. The design I have in mind for this show, this podcast, is, you know, eventually these monologues will require more study. Even now, you know, kind of organizing my thoughts is, which I've not done before. So again, I appreciate the support and getting through this with me. But that might get a little stale. You know, I could tell you personal stuff. I can go into stories in particular, but I'm not, you know, I'm humble enough, or whatever you want to call it, to say at some point, you know, you're going to want to listen to someone else's take, and so do I. So that's to say, I imagine maybe a shorter monologue section, a dialogue section, maybe not quite a la, you know, Mr. Vervaeke, but high level. And then maybe the unique twist that I would like to experiment with and see how it works, at least, is to return with either another guest or perhaps just a monologue commentary on what we listen to. My intention would be to avoid adversarial sort of stuff. You know, that's part of the ethic that I live my life by. Very capable with weapons and defending myself. But, you know, back to Craig Douglas and more experienced guys than myself, the avoidance of all of this stuff. I mean, back to Sun Tzu, right? suggests, so it looks to be not only the right path from an ethical point of view most times, not all times. I'm not a pacifist by any stretch of the imagination, but the nature of modern conflict makes it such, the litigious side, the purely unfair, justice no longer being blind component that isn't necessarily new, but it's sure coming into sharp focus now. To say nothing of, most of the time, having studied a little bit of communication theory and negotiation, most of the time these things kind of indicate a failure on somebody or both parties' parts. And that's kind of a tonal issue or preference of mine. So, again, if you guys have some suggestions, I'm sure you do, I would very much appreciate it. And if you want to make them aware of these episodes, or you think that I should reach out directly to them, either way is just fine. Okay, moving on. I had found this post by an account called Prepare to Perform. I've shared some of their posts before. I don't know if I think it's a guy. And very, very well put, I thought, was the following. Dually innervated by both the vagus nerve and the phrenic nerves, the diaphragm is quite literally the bridge between the mind and the body. The vagus is the 10th cranial nerve and is sometimes called the pneumogastric nerve because it sends information from the digestive and respiratory systems to the brain. The phrenic nerves are the direct cognitive link to respiration. The phrenic nerve exits the spine from the 3rd through the 5th cervical spine, I think he means vertebra, and provides direct motor control over the diaphragm. The vagal autonomic feedback loop is constantly monitoring our state and making adjustments based on the needs of our external environment. So much so that the respiratory system is making adjustments in every breath and every heartbeat to coordinate our every energetic need and even the anticipation of those needs. Even the anticipation of those needs. Back to this idea that we don't really think. How much of what we're doing has been automated, and then that automation has been contorted to conform to the reservation that we're on or the giant cattle lot that we're in. The mold. Over time, these signals get entrained into a continuum of acceptable parameters based on behavioral repetition in order to save energy over the long haul. So how would that instinct or design be, what does it state after those 10,000 hours of being basically seated, and then we ring the bell, you walk down or run down and do it again, then you go home and you sit in front of the television, maybe you had a practice like me, sports or something, and then you're right back to the sedentary. The epigenetic component of childhood is, it couldn't be overstated. And if that's in question, how about the swing in 1 year from, I believe it was like 35% of kids are obese in America to now, after a year of lockdowns, 45. Pushing almost half of kids below age 14 or 13, I think, are not just overweight, they are obese. Okay, moving on with this post. Automaticity is designed to save energy, but at some point we may decide that we want to think, react, or feel differently in certain situations or environments, and that's where we can influence our own psychophysiology through breath control. The diaphragm itself has very few sensory proprioceptors, so learning to direct its motion is challenging at first. True. However, a little bit of practice and a baseline of skill can be achieved that has life-altering potential. True. You can quite literally divert the deep functions of the autonomic nervous system and thusly how you react to stress. That's important. It improves digestive function and helps manage pressure more succinctly so that this sentence needs some work, but I think he's saying it can improve your posture and movement. Absolutely true. That's what we're leading into, is this little discussion on yoga and posture. He finishes up saying, essentially, when we take control over our breath mechanics, what we are doing is using muscular control over the diaphragm to consciously direct a central part of our deep physiology. If we apply ourselves to developing a very basic level of breath skill, we can insert these skills into any environment where we want to change our behavior. And I would extend that to say, if you change your behavior, you are changing the environment. Whether you're talking about the social or the physical. So, I follow this person. I don't know them. I don't know anything about them. I've just noticed that they have some pretty high quality content, and I thought that this went well with this ongoing discussion of breath work, which will, lead to the next phase, which is death work. And then, as one very much appreciated commenter pointed it out, I guess he was suggesting wisely, that we'll lighten things up a little bit when the time comes. So, in the breath post on Patreon, I mentioned, 20 some years of yoga. I got the certification to teach, though I never really had any desire to teach. I just wanted to go deeper on the topic, and that training definitely provided that. That was a leg up. I've taken classes in many different states. I've taken classes in, I think, all of the different styles, and I've arrived at the conclusion that heated vinyasa has the most benefit for, the person in the middle of their life who is working towards like advanced level of health. And I'm saying that because that might change, as I get older. I kind of doubt it, but apparently some of the other schools are pretty good for like more of a therapeutic approach. I tend to think that and this, starting to dovetail into the death work stuff, I tend to think that actually begins now, and that if you've gotten to the point where you're having major hip problems due to postural and muscular distortions, and you're 60, 70 years old, I guess you could take some human growth hormone or something, but you need juice. You need vitality to put into it. And you have that. I think most of the listeners now are less than, under 50. And if you're in good shape at 50, you still have plenty of vitality that you can redirect. If you look at it if you imagine it as fuel, and where are you burning it, you can burn it by building more strength. If you ever look at photos of like the Old West mountain men, or you read descriptions of them, we'll take one who is one of my major heroes in life, Jim Bridger. The descriptions physically of him were that he was sinewy, 6 feet tall, piercing stare, clearly gifted at like probably levels that we can't even fathom. But he was not a slight man, though Kit Carson is described, I think, as kind of slight. And the photos, I think, depict him, at least it appears that he's a little bit less maybe capable of movement or, vitality, what have you, than Jim Bridger. But both of these guys, if you drop them into a modern context, I don't think that they would, they could make the cut. Can you imagine Special Forces turning down those guys? Like, what planet are you on? What is the standard here? Just being buff. I don't tend to... I got to be careful with the words here. I work out, I lift, sometimes 7 times a week. I've lifted since high school. Can bench, more than twice my body weight. Maybe not today, but at some point, various points, I have been able to. And so, weight training is, in my opinion, essential. And I also think that yoga is essential. Where I think some of the bro science is veering off a little bit into like psychological, reactionary sort of, compensation in some cases, is, massive amounts of effort have to be put in, not to mention the supplements and the diet and whatever, to sustain that. And it's literally not sustainable unless you have the supply lines in place. Or, maybe you have your doomstead, and at that point, you've also become an herbalist and a butcher, you've mastered food preservation of all sorts. Most of the people that I've met who've gotten that far, start to have to divert their energy into other places. And so I'm not bagging on, if you want to work, to get huge, go for it. My opinion, what I do for myself is split down the middle, geared totally towards endurance. I recall, I don't listen to a lot of David Goggins. I don't follow him or anything, but I saw one clip where he was discussing one of his ultra marathon achievements, which are astonishing, I admit. And he said that the training essentially involved nothing as far as running. He didn't run at all. He just did super high reps with very low weight, which makes a lot of sense if you've ever done those types of routines. Just a little detour there. So similarly, and I don't know that I have many lefty friends remaining, like probably you guys. But I think I have acquaintances, and I have a few, and people that I need to engage with here or there. And in the event that, one of them were to ask me my opinion about things, I don't go around sharing my opinion about things unless asked. I would tell them that they need to get over the idea that weapons are dangerous and to be shunned, that they should immediately go and put resources and time towards getting really good with guns. I imagine that everybody listening to this has no problem with that side of it. We'll see. And similarly, to the rural man, to the right-winger, or whatever, these let's put it this way, if you have found yourself outside, and, the mold, if we want to go there, has impressed upon you this idea that certain things are off limits or tainted or the culture is toxic, of course that might be true. I mean, with many things that's absolutely true. In my experience of 20 years having done it in various states and achieved a pretty high level of competency, it's not really a fair assessment. One, when you go into a yoga studio, you do not need to say a word. In fact, I've probably said, I believe this is in the post as well, I probably said less than 10 words to anybody in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of classes. It's just not part of the thing. People kind of hang out sometimes afterwards. If there's somebody you want to talk to there, great. If there's not, and you're on a mission, you're on your mission, just blow out of there. Nobody gives a shit. They're just there to take your money. And more to the point is, if you are leading, your life and making those types of choices, you're not going to be stopping to, see if you're stepping on anybody's toes. Just keep your mouth shut, and you're fine. So, in the sense, like, we have this cultural divide. I'm not saying it's going to be repaired, but I'm saying there's people that deserve to get their hands on whatever tools and techniques and the information, which is like this classical liberal thing. Like, yeah, that stuff should be free. We should be free to go wherever we want, and more and more and more, that's where the walls are starting to move inward, right? Limiting your movement. I don't advertise any of this stuff. I mean, I'm advertising it now, I suppose, in a way, but nobody has ever questioned me on the seeming contradiction between, carrying concealed and then setting that thing aside and going into the yoga class all the time, like religiously almost, every single day, 7 days a week, sometimes 10 classes a week. I don't think anybody probably ever knew. This kind of activity, if you will, if you just looked at this as, I wouldn't tell anybody to expand their horizons. Maybe that's what I'm about to do anyway, but I don't necessarily mean it in that way. Because I'm not saying just go out and try some lefty activities, or, go into the city and see how the matcha tastes or whatever. I mean, I have vast experience in hipster locales, and I've never had a problem, and I've been armed and dangerous almost every step of the way. And it seems to me that there's this reflection of an outer, your behavior sort of reflects the inner state. And again, there's times and stupid stuff to do. Maybe right now is not the time to venture into downtown Portland, but I haven't been there. I think the reports are kind of ridiculous. I haven't been there in like 2 years, but again, I don't know. So you'd have to be smart. I could tell you where I have been. Colorado, Montana, Arizona, the sort of intermountain area. I see no issues at all mingling with either deep out in ranchland or right in the pulsing rainbow colored heart of the cities. So while that may or may not remain the condition of things, part of breaking the mold is, if you find yourself directed towards a thing that you need, but you also find yourself sort of hesitant, or there may be good reason for that. Judgment can be a harsh thing when you make the wrong judgment, and so, of course, use your best judgment. I'm trying to bring some of this stuff to an audience that may or may not have any experience with it. So I'll leave that part where it's at. Hopefully the point is clear. That if you are, approaching middle age, or even if you're younger, and all you're doing is kettlebells and martial arts, super applicable in many, well, not many, but certain circumstances. Taking care of yourself with whatever is available makes a lot of sense, because you need to take care of yourself every moment of every day. You're only going to have to fight or pull a gun, pull a knife under certain circumstances. So, in terms of building Batman, I'll ask Paul Sharp. If he's, I would I will bet anybody $1,000 right now that he has gone to yoga. If he's a practitioner, I don't know. That may very well be the kind of thing where he dips in and out as he needs. The guy is, his whole life, from the minute he wakes up and the to-do list for the next day when he goes to bed, is structured around training, which I happen to admire a great deal. And I've been lucky enough at certain points in my life to have lived a similar existence. It's intensely rewarding. I was, giving Bro Jogan a hard time in one of the last podcasts. However, not all of that is envy. I can tell you specifically where I disagree with the guy, or where we part ways or whatever, but he's a super sharp guy, and he's structured his life similarly in a way that is intensely rewarding for him. He's got that is a guy who I know does have a yoga practice, and I happen to know Paul Sharp has a pretty highly developed breathwork practice. So, it's an element, and yoga is an element. So, finally setting that aside, the advocacy or hopefully helping anybody who's hesitant to check it out, just check it out. But moving on, I wanted to give you an example of what a great yoga teacher looks like, because this is a part where you very well might think, Andy Edwards is right. I'm gonna go buy some shorts and a mat, and there's this yoga studio down in the strip mall, and I'm gonna check it out. So congratulations on the first part. I think that I can provide you a bit more direction in terms of refining it, and because no teacher is the same as another. I went to this place called Core Power for like 10 years. The price was right. The locations were right for where I was. The times of classes were right. Nice clean studio, facilities, etc. Solid deal for like unlimited classes, which is what I've always got to shoot for. And the teachers, however, no teacher is the same. And so if you have an issue and you're going to do this and you're that guy, just email me the website of the place or DM me, and I will help you discern this, because it's not entirely evident. I'm trying to think of a great, maybe it's like a gun store. Some gun stores have similar guns. You can get Glock 17, what have you, at just about any gun store. However, the guy behind the counter there's vast differences available to you. You guys know this. So similarly, what I'm looking for in a great yoga teacher, she probably won't listen to this, so I'll just call her first name, Claudia. In terms of, the basics of character, it's all there. She's showing up on time. She's kind and generous, and evidencing, some whatever basic knowledge you might throw at her before class. Okay, so most anybody can pull that off, but it's definitely there. There have been some experiences with teachers like this who can't pull that off. So that's kind of something to note. During class, you're looking for strong direction. And in training, as I recall, I said I never had much interest in teaching anybody, and I still really don't. One of the things that I recall was that for each pose that you were calling, you should give 3 cues. That's minimum. That is bare-ass minimum. If your teacher is not coming around and giving, because you're the new guy, if you need, you don't necessarily want to talk. I don't want to talk. I don't want to divert the attention of the class or break up the flow or try and raise my voice over if there's music or something. If we're 10 minutes into the class and she's letting you struggle, sure, finish the class, do your best, but start looking at the website, at the biographies, and go deeper. Does this person train in other places? Do they go on these retreats? Have they been at this for the number of years? Doesn't matter. I've run into some pretty damn fine, young teachers, and with maybe only a couple years of experience. They're just, they're more gifted. They're like any other realm. They're a little bit smarter. They have a little bit more energy. They've put a little bit more work into it. Claudia did all of that, and then much more. She is bringing in a lot of the central nervous system stuff, the stress management stuff, various other healing modalities are all available to her. And you will find that with a good number of teachers anyway, are dabbling, or, maybe they are a massage therapist on the side, or maybe they're a physical therapist or a nurse, or this taking care of themselves is like a calling, it's a way of living. Most every instructor worth a shit was a female. I understand there are a few out there that are pretty good. I never had one male that was memorable. That's not true. There was one guy who who was also a martial artist and pretty confident and in himself. So put the pieces together. It's probably not likely, but it's possible. Anyway, and other things you're looking for are a sort of narrative flow to the class, a beginning, a middle, and an end. The intensity, if we're talking about heated vinyasa, power flow type yoga, is going to be there, about 5-10 minutes in, it's going to start to kick in. You're going to be sweating. Your teacher should be constantly, from really the beginning to the absolute last moment of that class, cueing your breath. And this is why I'm talking about yoga now, because I found tons of benefits from yoga. If COVID was a little bit different, I would be actively seeking out some classes now. I have gotten to the point where I can manage a lot of this without a trainer. It's still, there's something valuable about being able to simply submit to the directions. You're not having to think everything through. The responsibility and the burden is on this person who's being paid to remind you to breathe as you move. And so as that stress of the heat, there's very little kind of social or interpersonal stress involved. Most people are not looking around. It's kind of too hard to do that. And if you go take one class from one good teacher and tell me if it's not difficult. It's pretty difficult. I was recruited into Division I sports beginning as a sophomore in high school, and I've been doing one type of physical activity or another, since then. I'm pushing 46. And it's gonna, if it's done right, it's gonna hit you very hard in a way that you have not been hit before. Martial arts, weightlifting, sports of all types, endurance, strength training. I've done all of that. Nothing hits you quite like this. And that post that I referred to, prepare to perform, is sort of suggesting in one of those lines that one aspect, one benefit of this sort of training is that you are going directly to the wall and you're finding where your limit in terms of as close as you can, probably without a whole host of medical monitoring devices, which I don't want around me. I don't want any of that. I don't foresee that being part of most people's lives. You don't need it. These types of classes and this sort of work will take you right up to that line, and a good teacher is going to have it's sort of different than, because maybe it's so female dominated, there's really no stigma in backing off. One, no one's probably going to notice. Two, the onus is on you to control the level of intensity upon which you're operating. So in the exercises that I provided at the end of the last episode, I think that I was maybe a bit hasty, because I probably, a lot of things, like them well, sometimes you sort of make assumptions. And I think one of the assumptions was there was probably several, so I'll kind of go over it quickly again. Being in a yoga class, a heated class, is very much like being in a sauna. It's generally about 100 to 100 and maybe like 98 to 105 degrees. You're dumping sweat. There's a puddle of sweat under you and everyone around after an hour or an hour and a half class. You're you're forced to focus on your breath because that's the only thing that will get you through. Sheer muscular power. I've been in many classes where a yoked dude walked in and walked out after maybe 20 minutes to a half hour. Okay, everyone in that class knew it was not because he had an appointment to go to. It was because he miscalculated what he was getting into. And what he got into was an engagement directly with himself, his ability to handle stress. If you ever go to a public sauna, say at a gym, it's on absolute display for you what's going on there. If people are training for a type of endurance related to stress, they can handle very regularly, let's say 180 degrees for 15 minutes. 20 minutes is probably going to be pushing it. If you've got a fat dude in there, or dude's just getting started, they are going to be dragging ass out of there if they make it 10 minutes. And there's a huge leap between 10 and 15. It's not just 50% more. It's like you just got sapped. The gas tank just went empty. And so what are you going to do? And therefore, if you do go to a sauna, it's another really good time to work on breath work, because those stress responses, physiological stress responses, are going to be very, very accessible, particularly if you worked out before. You've kind of relaxed. You probably have that condition like most of us do, like, the workout's over, the hard part's over, I get to go about the rest of my day. Good for me. And then you are being hit with another moment. And again, probably worth pointing out, some saunas you get in, it's 110 degrees. That's nothing. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for maybe 170, 180. I've not gone much higher than that. And I've not gone much farther than, say, 20 minutes. And that's plenty, because this urge to urinate or defecate, to which I referred, defecation is probably not likely. You can play around with that just laying on your couch and doing breath hold exercises. Full inhale, full exhale, always through the nose. Compress your core. This is another aspect that these core power and vinyasa flow type classes, very, very good for your core. Most of this stuff was really designed for middle-aged and aging women to put their bodies together. That's a big component of it. The guy who started core power admitted as much, and I think he was kicked off the board for saying it or something like that. He's passed away. So hopefully I'm not denigrating his legacy or his soul. I don't mean to do anything like that. I'm just saying that was the truth, and it was highly successful. I don't know what that company's worth, but it's nationwide and it's not going anywhere. And he happened upon a recipe. So if the core, we haven't really touched on it much, but it's absolutely crucial. And even, guys who are in good shape, a lot of that, if you say, that guy is in very good shape, he, quote, posted physique. If his core is not very toned, you and everybody else assumes he's got some work to do, because he does. And I don't know if this is a case of, physiognomy or what, but it's absolutely the truth. I keep saying this, absolutely the case, but it is that your core is 100% essential. And if it has the slightest hitch, if it has the slightest weakness, your performance is suffering. And the core is not, it's pretty, I would say it's, squat form is kind of a science as well. So I don't necessarily need to compare, but say there's a fair bit to it when you start considering that lumbar spine and this quote natural curve, and then you get up to the thoracic, where most of the time, if you're doing crunching type of stuff, that both of those are involved. And most of the time, my opinion is that some of these contortions and distortions that affect, as this quote for this prepare to perform post indicated, and there are other recent posts about the diaphragm. This is all interrelated. So if you've got core issues, meaning the obliques are asymmetrical, wildly asymmetrical. Everybody's asymmetrical to some degree. That's just a fact that the more yoga you do, the more you'll realize most of your problems are coming from this side or that, this hip or the shoulder. And the other one's actually much stronger than you thought. It's a strange, compensatory feature of the human body. And there's this sort of sheath of muscle that's going around, say, from your belly button all the way around through your back. It's not one giant sheath, but there's an interwoven sheath. And then you have this six-pack. And where those attach are directly related to your diaphragmatic control. And so they're directly related to whether or not you have breathing dysfunction. And if you have breathing dysfunction, you are compounding whatever trauma you have already experienced in life, one, and you are setting yourself up for diminished performance, at least, if not steering off the road at some point into a health crisis. So, going back to the good teacher, probably everything that I've said and much, much, much more is fully accessible to my friend, my former instructor, Claudia. And the point being here, do not settle for some pretty face who can call out the numbers for an hour. Anybody can do that. We want constant cueing of the breath. And we kind of left this on the table, so I'll return now to say this is like Pavlov. You're most likely going to be trained in what they call ujjayi. I don't have any idea how to spell that. Ujjayi breathing sounds sort of like this. I don't know that that's at all audible, but essentially what you're doing is you're moving the drag of air coming from your sinuses, from your nasal cavities, farther down your throat. So you're getting this audible kind of, and on the exhale. And that itself is a training tool where if you're doing it right, you will find yourself unconsciously slipping into that at times when your body is beginning to, again, adjust to the conditions of stress and the environment around it. The goal ultimately, I think there's higher levels that I've sort of been trying to point to. Hopefully we're pointing at them, where once the conscious competency arrives, you understand that it's not done, it's just begun. And that was like all the work was put in so that, yeah, you have an unconscious basis for this, that your diaphragm, your core, is working in conjunction with your posture, ultimately to lengthen your life and avoid a lot of unnecessary pain and suffering, but also to navigate the social and political landscape that we all are having to navigate, and, you know, make wise choices out of that, and not let the other person, the other, your enemy, you know, your whoever we want to label as the enemy, the threat, they don't get to make the choices. That, you know, in defensive sort of carry training, this is repeated ad nauseum, right? The bad guy gets to choose the time of the assault. I don't know that yeah, sometimes that's true, but that's not the case all the time. We make choices that lead us into situations, and we make choices that determine our future to one extent or another. So I think that now we're at the point where, you know, the second exercise where I was suggesting that, you know, I'm postulating that we have an opportunity through developing these types of disciplines to start seeding into reality our own will. I'm not sure if that's probably accurate enough for now. If you can control your environment long enough to drop into this alpha state, and you can calm the central nervous system such that you can get a grip to observe your own thoughts and begin to realize how much of them are not even your own thoughts, is the key point. You know, we are all subject to propaganda. We have all been indoctrinated. Much of our default assumptions and the way that we operate, they weren't really done with a whole lot of thought. Some of that is one of the major gripes from the good right is, you know, back to E. Michael Jones, this barren world, this slaughter of cities, slaughter of cultures, slaughter of the ancestry, the wisdom, habits, which probably extend down to literal breathing habits that we rightfully should have inherited from our parents, grandparents, and extended family, and which we did not. And this kind of brings us full circle, I hope, to where we're at now as mostly men who are mostly responsible for others, children, wives, loved ones, etc. In my humble opinion, taking full responsibility makes all this stuff kind of a no-brainer. So we'll set that aside for now. Okay. To finish up on these two exercises, so we're 100% clear, because I have a tendency to, as I said, make assumptions about things related to, you know, what we know or what we don't know. If you're doing the sauna type exercise or just a breath hold exercise, and you're verging on this point where, okay, I've held my breath so long that I'm about to piss myself. Don't piss yourself unless you have to, which is fine if you do. But the reason for this is you're going up to this very base reptilian level response that's overriding. It's like it's challenging you, the conscious human. The body is. And this to me is kind of the point. Mind over matter. You're retraining the body, and then you're going to calm it afterwards, which is part of the shower, at least for me, after a tough sauna, or, after a yoga class. That cold shower is borderline divine. What you've managed to do is go right up to the wall and hopefully gently, because you can have, if you push anything too far, you can have a problem. So you're approaching it with a type of reverence, but also a sternness, and you're just moving beyond a limitation. Like, we can sit around wherever in therapy, online, and talk about this shit, but if you want to do it, this is how you do it. Because you can't orchestrate, like in training, we can only orchestrate the real fight. We can only, again, Craig Douglas, fantastic steps in that direction. It only goes so far, right? So in gaining true endurance that relates to trauma, that relates to truly tragic, horrific things. Yep, some people can muscle through it. Most people, as Jordan Peterson points out, make the tragedy, the trauma, worse. Because that's all they know how to do, because they're in fight or flight. So they're either fleeing it, fuck this, I'm out, I'm dissociating myself from this. Ultimately, that won't, you're shirking your duties as a grown-ass man with kids, which again, I think that's most of the audience. Even if you're not, you're probably leaving stuff on the table in one way or another. And to actually, I think that to say that this is spiritual should be kind of obvious. However, it may not be. So if we have a physiological response that's like pissing our pants or puking or passing out, we have tons of them, or running, or shitting ourselves, that's going to keep us from our duties, well, that may be acceptable. I am not in a position to judge people. I am in a position to judge myself, and I judge myself that that's not acceptable. There's an opportunity to push a little bit more, maybe in 5 or 10 years, that boundary, the total amount of stress or the intensity or amplitude of that stress that I can take on my shoulders or think through has expanded. And there is incredible value to that. And there's also a direct tie, for me, again, it's Orthodox Christianity, and it's carrying the cross. For other people, I can't tell you what that might be, but it may be just simply spiritual. Okay, that's fine, and this will work with that too. Generally, I think that when you do enter these realms, without the superstructure of truth underlying it, you're not going to believe it. So you're only going to go so far. And it will ultimately be physical, and a lot of the kind of integrated benefits, mental, physical, and spiritual, in terms of sacrifice for others, I think there's a synergy there, because I think this is where we're starting to approach, again, reality, moving out of the spectacle, moving out of the matrix, stretching our mold to as paper thin as we can, and using what remains of our time and our diminished, will as human beings in modernity to some good end. And that's, I think, if there are still questions after that, please ask, because I would hate to try and lay all this out and then have anybody like, what the fuck is he talking about? I'm just simply talking about pushing your body to an uncomfortable place to expand, like similar to the way weights work, your capacity to withstand stress. It's really kind of as simple as that. It's just a little weird. So speaking of weird, and I'm going to amend my notes here because we're probably getting close to 2 hours. So I was going to go into doomsteads and mobility. I think that's a longer talk, which might be good to bring up with somebody like Lafond anyway. And I'm going to refer back to here at the end to building Batman. I really like this concept. The forum that it grew out of, I've spent some time on that forum, not a lot, but this is right in line. And in building Batman, we've got breath work, we're going to get to death work. These are hopefully just my, humble contributions. There's vast libraries of stuff from Shivworks and many other guys. Ed, we could go through a whole list. Maybe that would be fun to do. Guys I've trained with, guys that you have trained with. But the legal aspect of building Batman, is something that maybe Quintus Curtis, could help us with. I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to be a lawyer. And what I'm about to suggest is a theoretical idea. I'm not admitting that I've done this, and I'm not exhorting you to do it. I'm saying it's an exercise that is very useful. So, basically, what it involves is going out at odd hours, doing odd things in odd places, which, that old Farnham or somebody said it, don't do stupid things with stupid people in stupid places. Very good advice. I'm not exactly suggesting or that this exercise goes against that, but it's a next one. It's a judgment call whether you need it, whether you can pull it off, whether it will be helpful. And I think Ed would approve. I think Ed Calderon would approve. But essentially what it is just going out in your environment at night with limited tools. I am, again, not necessarily going to, I guess I could admit that if I had done this, I guess I could. Let's just say here, we'll do it like this. Theoretically, let's say, for the sake of imparting this, communicating it, let's just say I've done it, and I still do it. If you live in a suburban environment, I think it's probably easier, but it's probably more intense as well. If you live in a rural environment, this could be very hazardous. So you may want to adjust accordingly. And if you live in an inner city environment, choosing the time, the day, say Friday night at 3 in the morning would be very different than a Thursday at 7 p.m. So you'll have to make the call and find at what place do you actually start to become a little uncomfortable? Do you have legitimate cause to be uncomfortable? And then weighing that risk against the benefit. Also, clearly the location is important. So you're finding, as with everything, you don't walk into the gym on your first day of lifting and throw up 3 plates just to see what happens. Similarly, don't drive to downtown Chicago and pull off at the exit that has the most trash and hip-hop music audible from your car, and then ditch your carry piece and then ask your wife to pick you up at the next exit. Unless that's already your environment, that's not going to be, if you're Paul Sharp, that's his environment. Probably even then he might think this is not a good idea even for training purposes. But you're trying to find a level of intrusion into other people's turf that's where you have a pretty good shot, 95% shot of getting through unscathed, meaning you're not going to get killed or maimed. You might get caught. If you get caught entering someone's yard in the suburbs or turf in the inner city, again, and then rural, these are all very different consequences. So you could add night vision, and you can work in increments, which is what I would very much suggest, where I theoretically saying that I've done this or do this and have found great benefits from it. If you do go with night vision, it's going to bring up, and you get caught, the question of why the fuck are you here and you have night vision? If you don't, you're going to lose the opportunity to train with your nods, but you're going to gain something else. What are you going to do if you don't have your nods? What are you going to do if you don't have a flashlight? What are you going to do if you have the wrong shoes? On and on and on. So all of the variables, hopefully there's no 22-year-old kid who's never trained with professionals who didn't hear me on my caveat that I've never done this and I'm not suggesting you do it, that goes out and does this shit. It's a thought exercise, if nothing else. So we're thinking that you're in a suburban environment and you stand a really decent chance of not being shot, but also being able to escape if there is an issue, like you do get caught. What happens if you just run? Someone catches you in their yard and you just run. I don't know. That's gonna vary from place to place. The point is probably not to get caught, probably not to get seen. So you're probably going to have to adjust every single aspect of what you think you're capable of to this absolutely crucial component of not getting caught. You might make it 1 yard over if you live in the suburbs and you get 1 yard, and that's too far. You might, as a variable, like I said, have your wife or a buddy drop you off and meet you at some other, on the other side of a neighborhood or the other side of a forest. One other variation that I absolutely have done is gone out into the woods alone and navigated on foot from one point to another, which is quite, by yourself, it's quite a different thing than doing it with a team. And personally, it wasn't so much a navigation exercise as it was an exercise in finding my own limitations in any particular area of operations. I think that for those of us who were not in the military, we had, in terms of mold again, we have a certain set of assumptions about our capabilities, and those who were in the military likewise have another set. And we also have personal risks, liabilities, etc. And it may not be, the gain here may not be, well, I walked away with a better picture of how this area of the woods looks that comes up against my neighbor's property, and I noticed this type of natural activity at this time. That's all fine. That's great. But it's not really the goal. The goal is to find a point where you feel like you are transgressing. I notice I did not say trespass, though trespass is a type of transgression, I suppose. So factor that in. You're finding, just in the same way that you're finding this point where you're about to piss yourself under a controlled circumstance, we're looking for a place where you're about to piss yourself metaphorically in an uncontrolled or less controlled circumstance. Keep in mind that outside of some really hot, sort of dangerous areas, even let's just say downtown Portland, again, this is my home. I literally have ancestral memories from this place. I have absolutely zero hesitation of being dropped in the absolute worst part of downtown Portland right now. I'd probably just prefer to go without weapons, because the most dangerous thing that could happen in Portland is that you have a legal encounter and then you have to go up against the corrupt Justice Department. Again, something to factor in this theoretical discussion or monologue. But that's my I don't live there. I don't really plan on going back there, but I know it like the back of my hand. I know what's kind of, if you will, possible there. And yeah, one danger is I could be wrong, and that's part of the considerations, set of considerations in an exercise like this. The talk is, or the quote is, to become a criminal of purpose. And the question then is, if we're building Batman, so to speak, well, how do you do that without being a criminal? And I do not believe that it can be achieved in training. Because I could be wrong. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that it's possible, but you couldn't advertise it. I have not attended Ed's classes. I would like to go to participate in one he has called Urban Movement, which seems to brush up against the idea in this exercise. And I think Ed has definitely quoted this Mushashi idea to become a criminal of purpose. And there's nothing wrong with learning to pick locks. I think I've used it twice just in the past year, 18 months. There's nothing wrong with any of that. It's all useful information. We know this, and we have ideas of when it might be useful. And I'm suggesting that probably the most useful time is not when you're a cop and you can just whip out your pick kit and go in and save a child, which everyone's going to congratulate you for anyway. What I'm suggesting is that how do you achieve this in a world that is filled with actual risk right now? How do you, because if you need to become a criminal of purpose in what I think we should make a theme here, 3 weeks or the next 3 years, and your children, the lives of your children or your spouses, your family, your loved ones, they depend on this, and you don't already have experience with it, how are you going to do that? You're not just going to use the one tool. You're not just going to pull out the AR and get it done. What happens when you have a squad and you have all this, but things change? I don't really think that many people foresaw the type of oddity that we're in right now. So what is there to suggest that one of us is going to predict the next level of oddity, of bizarre? And this is definitely a place where if you guys have input, I want to know about it, because I'm not, there's a few things where I guess I could try and use the word expert. Novelist might be the only one, and that might be the most contested one, So I am not suggesting, and I'm not going to gain much from that, really. So this would be an area where I kind of want it to be a theme. Paul Sharp would have a very interesting take on this. He might have limitations on it too. Ed, given the cultural, the bicultural nature of his existence right now, might have a very interesting take on it. I actually think that my friend, who spent a lot of years in a lot of suffering and a lot of pain on the streets, is going to have some very interesting things to say about this. And it comes up against this other area as well, like our own internal compass, our morals and ethics. And how do you flex them? Should you flex them? Which brings us right up against, the conversation between pagans and Christianity and the Christ cucks and all these sorts of things, which, as a guy who was not raised as a Christian at all, who was raised very much to be, a materialist, optimistic spiritualist or something like this in Vanderklay's terms, but wound up finding truth in the Orthodox Church, I see a lot of room for this type of discussion probably pretty quickly, because as we hear all the time in martial arts and various training circles, you're not going to rise to the occasion. I think they add on that you're going to sink to like your lowest level of competency. But whatever the formulation, the truth is evident, stark. And this kind of fantasy that we all share, that the events which are rolled out before us in time, our fate, are going to line up with those areas of technical accomplishment to which we've devoted resources, time, money, ego, identity, is extremely dangerous. And adding a component of flexibility, physical through the yoga, mentally through the breath work, and as I say, my version of looking at it, what I've wound up with is the mold as a way to examine my own limitations and my own, where does my responsibility lie? What participation am I still taking in building up that that resistance, and how can I make it more flexible. All these things seem to converge in some way. And so I hope that you guys will have some feedback, and that I hope that this was of interest as again, a totally theoretical, incredibly risky and silly way to go about gaining certain experience that may be pretty critical at some point in your life. So until next time, take care.